I just spent a week visiting every yarn store on a small Scottish island, and here's what I found. Hi, my name's Sophie and welcome to Sophie Knits Daily. I have a very different video for you today. I'm going to take you on a yarn tour of all of the yarn shops on the Isle of Skye. The Isle of Skye is a small island, part of the Hebridean Islands off the coast of Scotland. I was so happy to find that Skye had a surprisingly large amount of yarn shops considering the size of the island, so I had to make a trip to each one to see what it was all about. It was an entirely different experience to visiting any of the city-like yarn shops that I've been to before. It felt so much more personal, and all of the owners and people who were working in the shop were super welcoming. All of the yarn shops had mostly natural fibres. There was lots of local yarn from Scotland and British yarn, and it was all the sort of yarn that I really love to work with and love to feel and see. So I was just super excited to get a glimpse and to be able to have a look around these yarn shops, so I'll take you through. So the first place that we went to was a place called Shilasdair in Staffin on the north coast of the island. The shop was attached to a cottage, and when we drove in we were greeted by two beautiful sheep in the field that we had a look at. We found out later they were, I think, Hebridean and Cheviot cross, which are both kind of native to Skye and commonly found on Skye. This was so different to any yarn shop I'd been to before. It kind of felt like we were walking into someone's house or conservatory. But when we got in, we were greeted by the most incredible colours of yarn I have ever seen before. They all felt really kind of natural and reflective of the island, a bit earthy, although they were super kind of bright and colourful. And we found out later the reason for that is that Shilasdair are a natural dye company. So they kind of focus on dyeing yarns using plant dyes that have mostly been sourced and foraged from the island. Some of the dyes that they talked to us about were tansy, reed, oak and madder that they find on the island, and I was really excited to see that all of the yarn that they dye themselves, on the label it tells you exactly what plants have gone into dyeing that yarn and producing that colour. The other interesting thing about them dyeing their own yarn is that they use different yarn bases to produce different colours. So there was a wall at the entrance to the shop where they showed the white bases took to the dye very differently than the grey bases or the much darker kind of brown black bases. The yarns that they dye use mostly British wool, and they also sell hand-dyed knitted hats, and they had some pattern books and knitting supplies like needles and things. So everything you could need in a shop. I made 3 purchases from this shop. So firstly, I bought the yarn base Smooch in 3 different colours. Smooch is 75% Blueface Leicester and 25% Gotland. It's British spun and hand dyed with plant dyes on the Isle of Skye. So this grey colour here, which has so much depth to it, is a kind of combination of white and grey, is undyed. And then this green colour here is dyed with tansy and with indigo. And it doesn't have like a colour name, but it's a kind of foresty, really earthy, bright green, and it has a combination of kind of lighter lime greens and a bit of a bluey green mixed in. The reason that I got these 2 yarns is I was super inspired by a pattern they had on display in the shop. The pattern was the Quiraing mittens by Maddie Harvey. The reason I was really intrigued and inspired by these mittens is that they're unlike anything I've seen before. So each mitten has an inner layer and an outer layer. In the inner liner, the mitten is knit entirely in stockinette, so it provides a lot of warmth and kind of the air can't get through. And then the outer layer is a beautiful lace pattern mitten. And what I love about that, having the inner and outer layer, is that the colour that you use as the inner layer really pops and shows through the lace detail on the top layer. So the pattern in the shop, they use a blue inside and a grey outside, and you could see kind of the blue shining through, and it just looked really beautiful, but also super practical. So I am always drawn to green. Green is my favourite colour, and I could not put this green down when I saw it. So the green is going to be my inner layer, and the grey is going to be my outer layer. When I was trying to choose that green colour for my inner layer, I also came across this colour. I'm not entirely sure what it's dyed with, and again it doesn't have a colour name, but it's a really beautiful reddish orange. There's definitely some more kind of brighter oranges shining through. It's just so complex, the colour, it's really, really nice. I bought it as a 10-gram mini skein with the intention to use as part of my Sweet Shop blanket by Laura Penrose that I have hidden away in my stash. I am really excited to get back to my Sweet Shop blanket, which is currently in storage, so that I can add little mini skeins that have special memories from our trip to Scotland. I think it'll be really beautiful seeing this when I'm wearing the blanket and kind of reliving that memory of being in the shop. So yeah, I'm very excited to put this in. So that's everything I bought from the shop. I'd definitely recommend you go and have a look around if you ever end up on Skye. The yarns, considering they were plant dyed and hand dyed, were very reasonably priced, and there's definitely a colour to suit anyone in their range. Yeah, so take a look. I am not sure if a lot of these shops that I'm going to talk about have online stores or not, but I'm sure if you were to contact them, they'd be able to help you out. Everyone we spoke to in each of the shops was super, super friendly. Yeah, so if you see anything that you're inspired by, then definitely give them a contact. So the next shop that we went to was a shop called Island at the Edge near Edinburgh on the northwest coast of the island. I said the last shop was entirely different to anything I've been before, but this was kind of out of the realm of what I thought a yarn shop could be. I think a yarn shop is kind of a loose term for this kind of building. It was a wooden building on the edge of this lady's farm where she has a croft of her own animals, including sheep. She breeds native Hebridean sheep and rare black Cheviot sheep. The building is used as a shop, but also as a workshop where the lady who owns it spins a lot of her own yarn using the fleeces from the sheep that she raises. So most of the yarn for sale is hand spun from her croft, but she also sends off some of her fleeces to a mill to be spun there. As well as yarn, she also sells hand-knitted fishermen's gansies, a lot of them using kind of traditional patterns that are native to Skye and to Scotland. The hand-knitted gansies were kind of upwards of £500, which I know is a lot of money and kind of a bit out of the budget for a lot of people, but considering these are hand knitted and the experience and the time that goes into knitting these garments, it's probably not even minimum wage. They're really, really beautiful to have a look at, and I'm sure they're perfect for a certain person, but I'm kind of more interested in the knitting the garments myself. So what I bought from this shop: firstly, I bought a drop spindle. A drop spindle wasn't at all on my list of things to buy or hobbies to take up, but the lady in the shop gave us a demonstration of using the drop spindle and she made it look really easy. I know for a fact this is definitely not going to be that easy once I start trying, and it was her kind of experience and technique that made it look so easy, but I was really intrigued and super excited to try. So I bought the drop spindle, kind of a very classic looking drop spindle, and two 50-gram like wool tops in a package, kind of a starter pack for drop spindling for 30 quid, I think it was. For both of the 50-gram wool tops, I'm not entirely sure what sheep they're from, but they're definitely from sheep that she has on her farm. I think this really dark brown, almost black colour is Hebridean, but I could be wrong. It's super, super soft and hopefully should be kind of fairly easy as my first yarn to spin with, but yeah, I don't know what I'm doing with spinning, and if I get any of my terminology wrong, then please do correct me, because I know I have a lot to learn and there's so many of you out there that are much more experienced than me, and I'd love to learn from you. That's my favourite part of having this channel, is the community and getting to chat in the comments. So I appreciate anyone that's kind of given me advice in the past, and yeah, I definitely need some advice on spinning. The white colour is kind of much more interesting, I think, than the dark colour. Again, I don't know what this sheep is, but what I can tell from this wool top is that it hasn't been washed. Again, I don't know very much about spinning, but the lady in the shop says that it's kind of 50-50 whether people wash the fleece and then spin, or spin the fleece and then wash it. She says spins the fleece and then washes it afterwards. So yeah, I think that's why this is unwashed. There's quite a variation in this yarn, or this wool, I suppose. There seems to be some kind of much more fluffier fleece, and then there's like little curly end bits of the sheep's fleece, which are really, really sweet. There's a lot of vegetable matter still in this fleece. The other part of this wool top that I found really interesting is this section of orange. It definitely doesn't look like a natural colour, and the only thing that I can imagine this orange is coming from is when the farmers paint the sheep during lambing season, so they can identify which sheep go with which lamb. Yeah, I just think that's a really cool part of the wool, and I don't know how much you'll be able to see it once it's spun up, but I know that it's there now and I know that it will be in it, so that's enough for me. My most interesting purchase from this shop, and probably from my whole Scotland trip, is this small 7-gram skein of handspun yarn. As you can see, it looks kind of odd, and that's because of what it's been spun with. So it's been spun with Hebridean sheep and Highland cow. I have never come across any yarn that has Highland cow content before, and when we spoke about this yarn in other yarn shops, they were pretty surprised and thought it was a very, very rare find. So I was very happy to find that. The black wool in the yarn is the Hebridean, and the lighter brown, what looks like human hair, is the Highland cow. The owner of the shop spun this up herself, and she said she got the Highland cow hair when she was grooming the Highland cows that she has at some point when they need to be groomed. I don't know much about Highland cow care but she says this is the only skein that she had of it, and it was super kind of rare, hidden under all of her other yarn, so I was very happy to find it. I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to use this for, but even if it's just as a display piece, it is a perfect memento of our trip, and it just makes me smile and laugh every time I see it, so I love it. We spent absolutely ages in the Island at the Edge shop. It felt so personal. It was much more like we'd gone round to her workshop for a little tour and tea and to meet her dogs, rather than going into a typical yarn shop. I do feel like in some of these yarn shops, you kind of feel like you have to buy something when you spent so long kind of talking to the owner and going through your life and their life and kind of traditions on the island. You do really want to buy something to support them, but I do feel like it would be really hard to walk out at that point without buying anything. But luckily there has been something in each of the shops that I've really desperately wanted to buy, but I would keep that in mind if you're heading to kind of much smaller personal yarn shops. So the next place that we went to was a shop called Handspinner Having Fun in Broadford on the southeast of the island. Pulling up to the shop, even the building is just intriguing. It's this super bright, colourful yellow corrugated iron building on an old pier. It's super kind of quirky and colourful. And what we learnt later from the owner of the shop was that this corrugated iron building was built in 1914 for the First World War as a drill hall, and it's been used as many different things since then, but it's been a yarn shop for quite a few years. She was saying that this is kind of a typical Skye building, and it is now a listed building. She described it as a flat pack building. Before the bridge was built in the 90s, it was very difficult to get supplies to Skye. They all had to be transported by boat. So the flat pack corrugated iron buildings were quite typically used and put up, as the supplies to build those buildings were much lighter and easier to transport across. Walking into this yarn shop felt much closer to a typical city yarn shop that I'd been to before. There was lots of yarns available, a lot of them on natural bases. So there was some Hebridean wool from Skye, as well as Jamiesons and Smith from Shetland, West Yorkshire Spinners and World of Wool yarn. Again, as the name would suggest, there was lots of supplies for spinning. There was drop spindles and items for kind of spinning equipment. There was anything you could possibly need for knitting, really. Knitting needles, stitch markers, kind of any little supplies that you might need. There was buttons, there was pattern books, there was kits for needle felting and peg weaving. So anything your heart desires you could find in the shop. It was like a TARDIS. You walk through a different section and there was just so much more than you could imagine. So I had a great time wandering around the shop. So what I bought, kind of in relation to my last purchase from the previous shop, I bought two 20-gram tops of wool. These are blue-faced Leicester and they're in the colour Humbug, but I believe they're undyed. The colour is kind of difficult to describe. It kind of looks like marble. It's a marbled light browny grey and kind of a much warmer brown together. I just think the colour is so beautiful. In an ideal world, I'd quite like to spin one of these 20 grams with half of the white from my previous purchase and then ply them together, and then the same with the other 20 grams, spin that and spin half of the brown and then ply them together. I just think it would create such a beautiful look, kind of like spin cycle yarn but more natural colours. But that is a little bit beyond me for the moment. I haven't even tried to start spinning yet, let alone plying. So yeah, we'll see how that goes, but that's my vision at the moment. The next thing that I bought is this cone of brown yarn. In the shop there was a whole wall of kind of old vintage cones of wool that didn't really have any sort of like labels, and I didn't really know what each of the yarns were, so I was going purely off look and feel. When I asked the owner in the shop what she thought this yarn was, she seemed to think it was mohair, but having a look at it a bit more, I think it's probably alpaca. I'm not entirely sure why I think this is alpaca, but it's giving kind of a softer haze than mohair does. Mohair fibres, to me, are typically kind of a lot longer, and this is a bit shorter and fluffier. And from alpaca yarn that I've used before, this has the same feel. So I'm kind of leaning on the side of it being alpaca. But if you know any kind of tests that I can do to figure out what this yarn is, then that would be much appreciated. I've had a bit of a Google, but haven't come up with anything from that. The alpaca haze is held on a much darker thread. Again, I don't know what the thread is, but I imagine it's a wool or a cotton. I am always really, really intrigued and drawn to yarns where there's a darker thread and a lighter haze. I just really love the look that it gives and think it adds kind of a lot of interest as a second strand with another yarn. That's definitely what I'll use this for. I'll use this as a second strand. I don't have the other yarn to go with it at the moment, but I am very drawn to these colours. I always come back to kind of the light browns and earthy colours, so I'll definitely find something in the future to hold this with. It's not going to be hard to fit this in. Possibly my most exciting purchase from this shop is 6 skeins of Jamiesons and Smith yarn in 6 different colours. I plan to use this for a Fair Isle garment, and I'm going to do a project vlog of knitting up a Fair Isle garment, so stay tuned for that video in the future. I picked this up in 121 mix, which is a kind of yellowy mustard colour, but looks like it's been dyed on a grey base. There's lots of grey coming through and it looks a bit deeper of a yellow. 27 grey, 2 grey brown, which I wouldn't myself describe as a grey brown. I think it's definitely more of kind of a grey beige, probably more kind of beige. 125 copper, which is a super bright orangey red. 118 moss, which I think describes this very well. It's a very deep foresty green. And 80 dark brown, which is a kind of very purpley brown. I am so happy with how these colours look together, and I can't wait to show you more on the Fair Isle garment that I'm going to knit. So that's everything I bought from Handspinner Having Fun. I definitely think it is the shop to go to if you're looking for any knitting supplies that you might not have brought on your travels, kind of any acquisitions or needles that you need to get hold of. It's definitely closer to that city yarn shop feel and has pretty much anything you could possibly need. The final place that we went was Skye Textile Mill near Dunvegan on the northwest of the island. This isn't strictly a yarn shop, but is a family-run textile mill that uses old Victorian knitting machines that were in woolen mills in the Victorian times that have been restored for use now to make knitted garments. Some of the machines date back as far as 1880 and would originally have been used using steam power or water-driven power. The kind family in the shop gave us a demonstration of how each of the machines worked, which was so interesting. The first one was the circular weft knitting machine. This produced lots of garments that were circular, so they used it to create kind of scarves, headbands, but also socks and mittens. The sock that they showed us on the circular machine was super interesting. It kind of knits the leg of the sock and the foot of the sock in the round, and when it gets to the heel it kind of knits back and forth, and it was just really interesting to see it knit up. It produced a really long joined sock in the end, and the family there kind of processed the socks into individual socks using other Victorian machines. The other machine that they had was a warp knitting machine. I hadn't ever come across the difference between weft and warp knitting before, and I'll show you some images on the screen. The weft knitting is much closer to hand knitting, where you're knitting horizontal rows of knit stitches that kind of build up into a fabric. The warp knitting, however, produces kind of zigzag parallel stitches of kind of woven thread, and it creates a fabric unlike anything I've seen before. It was kind of a zigzagged, interwoven, kind of really colourful fabric, just so beautiful. And I do have regrets that I didn't pick up a scarf in that kind of warp fabric. My boyfriend actually made a purchase from this shop. He bought a pair of gloves. Luckily we did the other clips whilst he still had two. He now only has one, as he is quite prone to losing things. But whilst he still had the two, he said that these gloves were super warm and he really enjoyed wearing them. They were super soft. They are knit with the Victorian machines, but using kind of responsibly sourced British wool. So yeah, definitely check out Skye Textile Mill if you're interested in machinery. The family there are more than happy to show you how the machines work and are very knowledgeable in these machines. There's lots of knitted garments there if that's more of your interest. Again, I don't think they have an online shop, but I'm sure you could contact them if you're interested. So that's it. That's my grand tour of all of the yarn shops and knitting adjacent places on my trip to Skye. If you're ever in Skye, I definitely recommend heading to a few of these places, or the ones that you're interested in, as well as the yarn shops and kind of the knitting history that we came across on the island. Skye is just a really beautiful, magical place to be. There's coastline for miles, there's incredible mountains, the scenery is just so beautiful. So yeah, I hope if you're interested you get to visit there. I had so much fun visiting these yarn shops, but also filming this video. If you are interested in tours of other places that have lots of yarn shops, then do let me know. I'll have to get researching where else in Scotland is a hub of yarn and knitting supplies. I hope you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for the next one. Bye.